welcome to one more episode of the State of Retention Marketing podcast. This is your host Ankur, and today I'm having a conversation with Samyukta. She's been a consumer marketer for the last 16 odd years, spent a whole bunch of time with companies like Unilever, Baskin, Robbins, and most recently Kaya. Thank you so much for doing this, Samyukta. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Ankur, for having me.
Awesome. So, well, of course, I did a quick intro, but would be super interesting to just have your journey from your own lens. How's it played out?
Sure. So, I think, I'm one of those few marketers who've been lucky. I started my journey with paints, with Asian Paints. Post that, I actually got to work very closely with Deepa Soman, who's one of the leading qual researchers of India. So, I actually got to learn ethnography studies and in-depth qual research, in terms of, so my entire love for consumer insights, I owe it to Deepa big time. After that is when I got my first break into marketing with Parley. And that's where I worked on some very classic brands like Fruity and Appy. I also did my first innovation during that stint, which was launch of a product called Love Lychee in the northeastern geographies of India. I then worked at Unilever in the global Vaseline team, and then with Lakme. And on both those stints, I think I was very lucky because I got to be part of rewriting the brand keys, which rarely happens in the life of a marketer. So in both those stints, I was very lucky that I got to be part of a team that actually rewrote the history for both the brands. Post that, I was in a very differentiated role with Abbott, where it was a horizontal role, working with everybody from the MD of the organization to the pharmaceutical sales rep across 9 different business units, 300 brands. So very, very interesting to be part of the marketing and creative excellence team. And then my final 2 stints as head of marketing were first for Baskin Robbins and then for Kaya. So,
of course. Awesome. So very different hats in some sense if you want. In real terms, if the categories have changed substantially, there's perhaps Vaseline is still close to personal care as Kaya might be. How do you connect the dots across these journey points? What are the common linkages, if there are any?
Lots. I think one key thing, and I think I learned this very early on in my career, is this whole thing of why the consumer needs to be at the core of everything that we do, right? I mean, the consumer is where either there's a problem or there's a desire or there's a need state or there's a want. The closer you are to your consumer, the more you're observing, the more you're listening, the more you're hearing what they are saying, the more closely you're watching, the more you know what they're looking for. And you can tailor everything that you're doing in terms of, what they require. So I don't think that changes because it's the same person who's waking up in the morning using that toothpaste, then going to work. I mean, it doesn't change. So, consumer, as cliched as it might sound, as basic as it might sound, I think I understand now fully. I think after 16 years, I can safely say I understand why consumer is the king.
Fair enough. So that also would probably make me wonder what has changed in these 16 years because the world has gone a lot more digital. The consumer personas have probably become more diverse. The whole art of storytelling, the way it used to be done earlier, where you will talk about SECA women in tier 2 cities who are young mothers who want to send, let's say, something in their kids' tiffins. Now, that's the definition of a segment. Now, that becomes somewhat different in the world we are in today. The ability to talk different stories to different customers becomes slightly more available to as a brand marketer. How do you deal with this world?
I think with every generation comes its own set of challenges,
of course,
own set of opportunities. And I think the good part about our roles as marketers, advertisers, media professionals is, again, the need to really understand the socio-cultural, economic, psychology of the new generation that we're dealing with, so to speak. So, for example, if, when I was at Baskin Robbins, the need state was to understand millennials, especially younger millennials, and what they're doing. And why they're interacting or why they're not interacting, and what's getting them going, what's completely putting them off, their triggers, barriers, motivation, etc. And we played to that and digitize the brand so as to ensure that we're there where they are there. With Kaya, we had to understand Gen Zs because we realized that it was that population that understood the brand, actually knew the brand, but wasn't really interacting with the brand.
Okay.
So it was a completely different conundrum. One thing that we understood was that young people, and when I say young people, I'm talking about the Gen
Gen
Zs.
Z.
I'm no longer
Yeah.
talking about the millennials.
Sure.
Actually played back saying that white coat, behind closed doors, big technology, must be painful, must be very expensive. And I should be having some real skin, hair problems for me to come to a brand like this.
Sure.
Which means, but I know that the quality must be fantastic. So later on in life, when I achieve a certain life stage and start earning a certain amount of money, this will definitely be my port of call, but
Okay.
right now, not for me. And that's when we realized that there is a definite problem in the way the brand was being perceived, because our customers, and I know you guys are so much into retention and all of that.
Sure.
Our customers are up there when it comes to loyalty because
Okay.
they've grown up with the brand. So
Sure.
someone who came as a 17, 18-year-old into the brand was now 34, 35 and had been with us very loyally.
Sure.
And that's very rare. It doesn't
Yeah, I
happen
can
in most
imagine.
cases. It
Especially
doesn't
this
happen.
category, right?
Exactly.
People tend to flirt around a lot
They
more.
do. But in a case like this, when you have your Dermat at the core of everything and you're witnessing results, you're putting in so much of your time, effort, money into something like this, then you will not switch. It's not as frivolous as a product.
It's a lot more involved as a decision.
Very,
Would
very,
be fair
very,
to say?
very.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's an investment. These are the customers or clients who understand that my skin is an investment, my beauty is an investment.
Also, degree of consistency that will be reaping incremental benefits, because if you abandon halfway through and go elsewhere, you'll probably lose the benefits you've gained.
Correct.
In some sense, it's also the trust in the brand that they've given you results so far, so you'll
Very
continue to
high.
engage.
Very,
Yeah.
very, very high.
I would love to double click a little bit into. You're doing it across a certain number of stores.
Yeah.
With a certain quantum of staff.
Was doing.
Of course.
Yeah.
You've done this at a certain scale
Yeah.
and a certain quantum of staff. How does the orchestration of something that complex happen?
So it's honestly not that complicated. Because again, in a case like this, the need obviously to automate, the need to have these, conversational AI-led conversations, the need to do predictive analysis, the need to then ensure that we are constantly engaging and nudging with them and not with this one-size-fit-all kind of communication. And I think that's where I think automation dashboards, getting the right kind of analytics can play a very big role. And that's really where the journey was when, we were trying to kind of put all of those matrices in place. Because for us, our loyalty program had always been there and it had always been doing well for us. But now it needed to be kind of taken to the next level. Because the minute we did this entire space of let's talk to the younger customers, we needed to ensure that we did it not at the cost of existing customers. Because this whole journey of saying I'm acquiring new, but I can't be doing it at the cost of losing. I need to acquire and retain with the same balance, right?
From a brand lens, you have two different audiences they want to talk to, and they'll probably resonate better with two different messages.
Yeah.
How do you deal with this dichotomy? Is this something which will manifest itself in the way you come across different media? For instance, you have a lot of in-store media. How you come across there? You would have a lot of brand collaterals across, let's say, outdoor media or print media or other kind of media. And then you have a whole bunch of digital, which has very clear room to kind of separate out that this ad is targeted to this audience and this ad is targeted to this audience. How does it manifest over there?
So I'm going to do a little bit of storytelling here and go back in time a little bit. Yeah. So one key insight that I received when I did my study with the brand was very, very clear that the brand had always been inclusive. From the time it had been manifested, we'd always had men coming into the clinic. It had always been a brand that was safe, inclusive, honest, authentic. The problem was those narratives and those conversations had not been put out. So it's almost like having a Mona Lisa at home and then nobody really knows about it. It was almost that we were sitting on a golden egg like that. What we really did was we took a very brave step in saying that if the brand is truly inclusive, which it was, and imagine being inclusive at the ground level, it doesn't really happen. And to think that the Gen Z tenet of, living and life is about being inclusive, is about being honest and authentic, is not about labels, is about just being real and as real as possible. You're like, okay, that's just perfect. So when we turned 18 as a brand, we did a campaign called Kaya Turns 18. And we actually, so this is where you were asking me how I connected the dots. All my brand, creation journeys, recreation journeys on Vaseline and Lakme held me in very good stead when we did the new brand key for Kaya with purpose at the heart, because the purpose was organic. It was not something that had to be force fitted from anywhere. It came from the legacy that was pre-existing in the brand. Which is rare, because in the brand key, that's the roots, and you kind of start.
Stay consistent with something like that is also hard.
And it's beautiful, but because the brand's done it very, very successfully. And that's where we started. And then we realized that, like you rightly said, there was a lot of conversation in terms of saying that what should be the look and feel? What should be the tonality? What should be the persona, of the brand, not of my consumers? Because the consumers were 18-year-old to an 80-year-old. Literally, we have people across the spectrum. You talk so much about lifetime value.
Insane,
this
right?
hits all the boxes and as perfectly as possible. And then we realized that inclusivity, honesty is something that, some generations are living it. Some generations want to do it. Some generations look up to it secretly and say, wow, I wish I was like that. But it ticks boxes with everybody. It kind of makes sense to everybody.
Okay.
So that's where we kind of did this, saying that, and everybody wanted that breath of fresh air in terms of, from the look and feel perspective, real people. So we didn't shoot with any models even when we did. So the whole campaign is not even a campaign, it's a brand purpose that's here to stay now. It's called Beautiful is You. So if Ankur, I were to tell you, you are beautiful, it's a tad condescending. As opposed to if I were to say beautiful is you, you kind of embody what beautiful stands for from your lens. I'm not boxing you. I'm not giving you a benchmark.
More positive sounding.
It's very positive, and it's you. Like you define, you want to do 100 things in order to look 10 years younger, your own self younger, not anybody else's benchmark. It's your beauty. You decide. You don't want to do anything. You want to maintain status quo. Again, you decide. Because another insight was that clients did not want to tell anyone. They would show their Gucci and their Prada, but they wouldn't tell anyone that I'm going in for a Botox and a filler. So there needed to be also a lot of awareness. And we realized that as a market leader, as a #1 brand, or that ever even created a category like aesthetic dermatology, it kind of became our responsibility to normalize these conversations, about saying, yeah, I'm getting it done. And I'm getting it done because it's the best thing possible. And it's easy, it's safe. And that's where we also started using our Dermats, and we actually coined the term called skinfluencers. And they started then doing a lot of these reels and, YouTube shorts, etc. And we started pushing those out even in our performance, CRM communication. We started using that exclusively in terms of how do we kind of create video content with them.
The whole subject of
completely and normalize it. There's nothing to hide. And in fact, it's something that that's flaunt-worthy. Just as everything else in your life is, this is also something that you should be talking about.
It's kind of funny because just earlier today, I was having a conversation with somebody from the insurance industry. Turns out people who are insurance brokers don't feel particularly a great sense of pride in that profession. So one of the things they did was to actually put hoardings up or congratulating the top performers in that particular profession. And suddenly these people would come with their families to break coconuts and then be very proud of their job profile. So what's very interesting is the common thread around adding prestige to the situation where otherwise it's a bit of a taboo.
Correct.
And then suddenly you have a lot more acceptance, a lot more resonance, and then life changes for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Right, so, what would be very interesting is to understand that in terms of putting all this information out there, what you're selling to, let's say, 50-year-old or a 20-year-old or a 15-year-old, how does that manifest? Because are these, you found something which resonates with everybody in some sense, which is a great, let's say, situation, because then you don't have to worry about alienating one audience in favor of the other. You had that situation where you deal with two audiences. So how does these situations manifest from content lens and also from a distribution lens?
So I'll pick up the content lens first, because huge believer in organic, huge believer in brand building and content. So for us, what we started doing, which had never been done before, was generational content. And when I say generational content, we actually started then for Mother's Day inviting two generations together. Which we'd never done before, and not necessarily mothers and daughters, but anyone who shares a relationship that's akin to it. Similarly, on Father's Day, we'd never spoken to men before. So, of course, we did the, Men's Day campaign and all of that. We did, November and all of that. But beyond that, we also started doing, so if Mother's Day became a 1 week campaign, so to speak, and it had like a 360 lens in terms of, D2C, e-commerce, on social, performance, CRM, and in clinic. We started then doing that for Father's Day as well, where we started then inviting, and then we also went into the segregation of the kind of services and products that we had to offer, which was very specific to a particular cohort or a persona.
Right.
So the messaging did not change. The messaging in terms of the look, feel. So we kind of went back to the drawing board of saying that all those years ago, like you said, 15 years ago, when I started, we always started with a key visual saying that this is my brand, this is my key visual, this is my thematic, and this is my IMC. We have literally run it that way on digital as well, saying that nothing can change simply because it's a little shocking when brands start talking different languages on different platforms, because then you're wondering, even as a consumer, what's happening.
Yeah,
Where did the brand get lost suddenly, and how can it be a little?
You still have to have a degree of cohesion and, let's say, consistency and
You
coherence.
have to, no? You have to. I mean, I don't know a
No, as a
better
brand marketing, I think
articulation, but yeah.
fair to expect a degree of consistency. And as a consumer also, if you start to, let's say, mixed up about a brand, and I have seen case studies of brands which have tried to be multiple things over multiple years.
You can't.
And that just sucks, because then the user also doesn't resonate with it.
Yeah. And that consistency across every platform is very critical. Two, of course, when you're doing CRM, your messaging can be about, somebody who stopped coming because I shut down a clinic somewhere, or my clinic moved from, say, from Juhu to, say, Lokhandwala. That messaging can be basis my persona and, my analytics and dashboards. I can then tailor that messaging, but that messaging tone of voice, that messaging visual has to still be, in sync with what the mother brand has been defined.
Absolutely.
Performance mein aap clickbait karo, do a BOGO, do a 10% off, it's fine. But even that language, we ensured that there is a certain language, there are certain words that becomes very, very critical, because people are people and a brand is a person. At the end of the day, a brand personifies and stands for something.
You don't want to come across as somebody too desperate, to this, to that, whatever. So across all of your content that you're articulating, it would become very critical to make sure it's basically the same person talking, right?
Yeah, it's consistency. It can't, like Kaya has to be Kaya no matter where Kaya goes. And Kaya can tell you different things in different places, but will say it as Kaya, not as, can't become somebody else in different places.
I think one of the fun factors about our life and conversations is we deal with different kinds of people who are in the driving seat for some of these engagements. So the technical thing, when it comes to a travel company, for example, the whole cross-sell that happens between booking a ticket and actually traveling, maybe you want to buy seats, maybe you want to buy insurance, buy a cab, whatever. It's a very technical, very tactical, very, let's say, objective thing to do. There's no storytelling there, there's no brand play there. It's a transactional kind of relationship, and that works out perfectly okay from the product ecosystem. This is the people who are engineers / product managers who understand customer journeys and funnels extremely well. And they're able to do a great job at automating some of this, making the most ROI out of these situations. At the same time, we have the other end of the spectrum, which are marketers. They don't care about automation. They don't care about much else. What they do care about substantially is the consistency of how the brand has to come across. And that's where we see a lot of interesting lessons also getting applied to whatever the automation has to happen. It still has to make sure the whole storytelling is very consistent in nature. So I think where we found the most amazing outcomes perhaps is where these two things talk perfectly nicely to each other.
Correct.
Because you go this end of the spectrum, you become inefficient, because you'll start saying the same thing to a large audience.
Correct.
And you don't become sensitive to the history of the person.
Right.
So what we've understood, and you just described yourself, is people come in at different age brackets.
Right.
People come in different genders. People come at different, let's say, starting points of their journey in terms of the therapies or the kind of treatments they're going through. And this is all very individualized in nature, which means the kind of journey they'll have with your brand also be very unique, right?
Correct.
So if I've gotten X done today, I might get done Y tomorrow and Z day after tomorrow. What's interesting is the fact that I might have a relationship which is going to last multiple years and a substantial amount of money for the brand. At the same time, a substantial amount of value delivered for the consumer as well. So maybe a good idea for me to just double click a little bit in this whole segmentation lens that you have, where the obvious ones, the gender, the age bracket, the problem statement, perhaps are lenses. Is there any other behavioral / psychographic segmentation that you think applies to people who come to your platform? And is that something you're able to manifest in how you segment audience, how you think about them?
Yeah. So, in fact, after we did the whole, repurposing of the brand, the other thing that we then picked up very closely after we made our Dermat influencers, one thing that I drove then was actually and this was an idea that actually came from the board in terms of saying that exactly what you said, that do we know the person who's coming in their 60s, 50s? What's happening in that person's life?
Sure.
So we actually spent a lot of time doing extensive consumer work along with our dermats to kind of understand the journeys that they have personally witnessed. We have something called the Kaya Smiles program, which has
It's the
the
loyalty thing.
platinum
Of
and the
course.
loyalty. So the platinum and gold elite, which is more than like 45-50% contributor to the business. So
Okay.
they are your main
Of
audiences,
course.
and they're the ones who have lasted a lifetime with the
With the
brand.
classic definition of the majority of your profits will come from like a small bunch of your customers who will
Absolutely,
be there with you.
absolutely. So we kind of sat down with them and said, exactly what you said. What was your initiation into the brand? What made you come?
Sure.
What made you stay? What do you like about the brand? And what's happening in your life? Like, when you came in your 20s, what was happening? When you,
Sure.
continued with your 30s, what happened?
Hmm.
Then we kind of, cross-reference this with the kind of services they had picked up, or the
Sure.
services that they stopped taking and the new services that they started picking up,
Hmm.
or the cross-pollination between the kind of journeys that they were also going through,
Sure.
not just from a monetary spends.
Hmm.
Then also playbacks in terms of what they were communicating, their motivators at every stage.
Sure.
I'm getting this done because, or
Right.
this makes me feel a certain way. I need to do this because, and
Right.
that kept wearing
Of
at
course.
every stage. One, when you're underconfident; two, when you're busy and stressed out; three, when emptiness syndrome. Like there's so much happening at every stage. And you can't just say, I'll give you 50% off, I'll give you a BOGO. I
Absolutely.
mean, that's the most ridiculous thing a brand
Absolutely.
can be doing. So we actually have a beautifully crafted brand book that
Hmm.
we have created that actually has each of these personas listed down in depth with all of this information, including dermat-led services, like including products that they pick up, including therapy-led services, along with these, slice of life content in terms of what it is. So this can kind of be used then everywhere without
Very
diluting
fascinating.
anything.
Absolutely very fascinating. And that's what I would probably want to zoom in even further on this to say that, okay, on one side, you did all of this research to understand these patterns and these usage needs and these consumer stories and their life slices, right? On the other side, you have to manifest this into every new customer that comes in.
Yeah.
So in some sense, while of course the user's behavior over a multi-year period will tell you a lot, what is it that you capture on the day zero or the first interaction, which helps you, let's say, bucket or place the user in some sort of a direction? Because on the earliest you can be sensitive to their needs, the better it gets for you as a brand.
Right.
And the more you know about them, the more effective you can be. But if you ask too many questions, that also is a bit of a pushback.
Correct.
So how do you draw a line between, let's say, gathering more meaningful data only for transactions? Because transactions will take time. So let's just say if you were to do a bit of a consumer profiling study and people don't like to fill out surveys, what is your lens on gathering information?
This is interesting, and I think this is true for not just my last brand that I worked on, which was Kaya, but it was also true at Baskin Robbins. It is also like so many marketers that I've met at various forums.
Sure.
We've had similar conversations stating that how do you capture information, because all this what's the right way to articulate? All the tech savviness, the data analytics, the brains, and not the brains, but yeah, all of this very savviness. I think that's only what is coming to my mind right now. That exists with the head office team, the marketing team, the digital team, agencies such as you all, partners that we work with. That is up there. And then when you go down to the basic, your moment of truth is actually happening on the shop floor. It's happening with the salesperson who's present there. And if you make the mistake of not training that person to capture data in the right fashion, without being intrusive, like you said, or without being intimidated, without making sure that the client runs off. Well, that's a right way to kind of do it.
Right?
Second, is that person then technically sound enough to even, or do you have a system that is so easy and that is not wasting their time? Because one thing that anybody on any shop floor will play back and tell you is that time is money, literally for them. And they don't want to be wasting their time filling in lots of information. Like forget the customer, but your own ops team will not want to do that because, and rightly so. So I think the faster we understand that, and that's what has been my endeavor in both places. How do you kind of simplify the life of the person who's ultimately going to generate that revenue for you?
Of course. So Samyukta also spent a bunch of time at the indulgence category at Baskin Robbins. And that's a very interesting brand. I've had fairly interesting memories of it from my times at college and all of that. And from a lens of tier 2 cities, tier 1 cities, consumer behavior, generational changes, That's also a very interesting diversity of audiences you're talking to today. And what is that unified story that you spoke about that the brand needs to resonate with? And then how do you manifest it across multiple media simply because the generations need to be spoken to differently? So what is the story there?
Perfect. So I'm going to start with where you opened the conversation with for Baskin, where you said you have memories about it.
Absolutely.
That's really where the brand was with Millennials.
Sure.
So when I joined the brand didn't have a strong digital presence at that point in time. The brand was still selling from, the parlors and the GT and MT. Those channels were all in place. But we were not listed on any aggregator platform at that point in time. And when we did a research, I mean, thanks to Deepa, I keep my starting point of any marketing journey starts with research.
Of course.
Couple of very interesting insights came from the consumers. One, exactly what you said, nostalgic brand, childhood brand, post-dinner walk with my parents after dinner, go to the nearest Baskin Robbins parlor.
Some 31 thing, right? Back
Perfect. Choose from the 31 flavors and then enjoy my ice cream and then come back home.
Yeah.
Today, not relevant for me anymore because today I have options of regional brands like Naturals, Ibaco, Gyani's, Pub Rice, and this was Northeast, Southwest. And very similar in terms of regionally very sound brands serving fresh fruit ice cream flavors. So that is what millennials had kind of switched to. Yeah. Second, there was a slight alienation of men happening with the brand. Not too sure if it was because of the color pink or otherwise, but ice creams as a category is fairly gender agnostic. But with Baskin, it was a 60% skew towards women. So that was another problem there. So millennials alienated, men alienated.
Ouch. Okay.
That was big. Third, because there was this whole thing of not being kind of present because we're not kind of gone out there and made a lot of noise. Of course, everyone knew of the brand, but it was not leading to any kind of conversions in terms of business impact. So then we sat down with Swiggy and we made a proposition to them that, let's go. And this was for the first time. It actually became a use case, a case study after that. In terms of saying that let's go 50-50 on the creative partnership as well as the media partnership. Day one of IPL, because Swiggy was the official sponsor, day one of IPL to the last match.
Okay.
And they also had a very deep integration with Hotstar at that point in time. And the insight from the Swiggy team was very simple, little condescending towards men, saying that men are a little lazy. And at that point, Hotstar had that gamification.
I would take it as a matter of pride.
Okay,
lazy
perfect.
people do the best of inventions. But let's get back to Swiggy.
The whole idea was that, the whole gamification used to happen during the IPL matches on the Hotstar app. And they didn't want to kind of leave that in order to even switch to another platform to call for food or anything else and come back. So Swiggy had actually integrated with Hotstar to say that you can just call for your food also right there on Hotstar itself. So you really don't have to move that finger also. You don't forget the couch. You don't even have to move.
That's how innovation happens.
Right? Perfect. So that's where your tech innovation is happening. So that's where Baskin got listed as well with, our top SKUs. And what we also did was, in order to combat these regional players, we launched fresh fruit ice creams with that 4 top selling SKUs, which was Alfonso Mango, fresh strawberry, Chiku, and tender coconut. The one that was most popular across. We also crafted this in a 700 ml sharing pack so that it's not, it's cricket and everything. So we kind of hit all the boxes from every P possible. It was kind of like, perfect.
Fair enough.
It was a punt because we went exclusive with this launch for summer. And summers where summer kind of dictates the ice cream industry and the business. Your summer's good, you're sorted. Summer bad, not this thing. So it was a punt that we kind of took. Brave one, foolish one, you can call it whatever. In retrospect, great one. But at that point, we weren't too sure. But this is what we did. We went exclusive with Swiggy on IPL, crafted the content. And that kind of suddenly made an offline brand online. It gave us presence everywhere because we also layered this with outdoor in 22 cities. And suddenly the brand was just there across, to answer your question, tier 2, tier 3 as well. It went beyond just your metros and tier 1 cities.
But this suddenly drove demand also very online because if I'm seeing hoardings outdoor and I'm seeing all of this on IPL, the first reaction of that audience is now to order it online. And this is where Swiggy ends up completing that loop as well.
Correct.
demand and not so much from the offline store.
So
I mean,
both
of course, it'll
happened.
help some.
Both happened. So a good thing. That's what I'm saying. In retrospect, you can
Of
connect the
course.
dots when things are successful. And in our case, luckily for us, it paid off very well.
Sure.
This actually became a new channel of business that was then being driven by the marketing team.
Which is what now makes me wonder, when you spoke about the men getting alienated and the millennials getting alienated.
Yeah.
Did that solve partly, fully, some sense?
No, to a very large extent. Because for men, it became habit to call
Of
for
course.
ice cream.
Yeah.
And that's all it took, more than 21 days if we were to talk about every philosophy out there.
Yes.
Two, for millennials also, it was suddenly online, right? Like, of course, we couple
more
this with
accessible
social
in some
media and
sense.
everywhere. So suddenly, the brand became a cool brand to resonate with, and it was no longer
Also had
this.
a splash flavor, which the kids
Correct.
still resonate extremely well with,
Correct.
right? So obviously there's product innovation that goes back
Yeah.
again from consumer insights lens to solve for that lens. So, one of the things that I've been curious about, and I met Mr. Mohit one of these
Yeah.
events at some
Yeah.
point, and I was very curious about the level of, let's say, access to first-party data in that world and that relevance, because while, of course, you can do everything you want from a brand lens and
Yeah.
storytelling lens, the first-party data in that space, and that's true not just with you guys,
Yeah.
but also with the FMCG ecosystem, is not quite there. So everything you do is from a sampling research lens and not really from a first-party engagement lens. And of late, I see a lot of brands, including people like Cadbury, people like Britannia, getting kind of a little touchy about getting more first-party data into the game. So do you see merit in FMCG ecosystem trying to get this either from a sampling lens or from a dominant lens? Or how do you see this playing out? Because, Baskin Robbins might have set their own D2C platform, and there are now fulfillment platforms available. And all the digital marketing you do will end up getting driven there. On the other side, you have the Swiggy stores, which will not give you customer data. If you drive digital marketing traffic there, you'll never get the fulfillment information. How do you see that dichotomy playing out?
I think now with all of the cookie crumbling and all the conversation happening around it,
Right.
I think everyone has to have their data as robust, and I think that's where you guys will play a very big role.
No,
right?
so I'm curious about.
I think it's the right time for you all to kind of enter
absolutely.
everywhere, especially in this giant FMCG space.
Which is what makes me wonder. So, for instance, the Cadbury or Baskin Robbins also, you don't have a D2C platform, or you don't intend to have one because there's no, let's say, big merit in doing that. The ticket sizes are not going to justify the logistics cost or the marketing efforts. If it's Baskin Robbins ice cream being searched online, a Swiggy is probably going to be a better click-through and conversion path than your own website. So then what do you do and how do you play it? And we've seen some examples of the joy delivery ecosystem from a Cadbury, for instance, but I don't know if it's sufficiently widespread from that lens. So should brands apply the transactional lens to the outcome to say that I'm going to drive a full funnel outcome and it's supposed to be a profitable, let's say, ecosystem? Or is this more consumer dipstick market research kind of lens that I have at least 1 million odd consumers out of the 50 million that I'm interacting directly with, and I'm using that to build my personas, my patterns, and whatever, and that learning becomes applicable to my larger marketing ecosystem?
I think it's that conundrum has kind of been sorted.
Yeah.
Would probably be a conundrum maybe 2-3 years ago.
Sure.
I think today every brand, and I don't want to name brands
No,
particularly, but
obviously there's evolution journey.
Absolutely. And I think today you see two Indias kind of panning out, right?
Okay.
You have brands that were born digital, right? They're like the Gen Zs. They're digital natives. They're the first people who arrived on the scene. Totally. They are the ones. Now you look at any startup founder out there talking their growth journeys. They're talking about experience, touch and feel happening with their offline stores, experiential stores, right? They are talking that narrative that FMCG talks. And when you look at the big, large FMCG giants, they are looking at these guys and saying, okay, how do we, now they all have their D2C platforms. Like you said, they're doing it for awareness. Probably what started as awareness, let me craft personas, has now become end-to-end fulfillment journeys as well, even if it's catering to say 5%, 10%. Someone recently told me that, they're actually doing 15% of their business is coming from their own D2C platform, which is massive. For an FMCG giant to be doing that is fantastic. Huge. So clearly, I think both ends, like you said, this spectrum and this spectrum need to kind of interact. I think everyone is learning, unlearning from one another. Everyone is doing everything. So offline is going online, online is going offline. No one, and I think there's no API, of course, that integrates these two worlds. I mean, unfortunately, it's a human API that is required to connect the two worlds, which is not possible. Not yet, at least. Not yet, at least. But yeah, I think everybody has to have their own data in place. I think there's no escaping that anymore.
That's where I get asked the question of ROI and the steps towards that, because for brands to invest in that kind of customer data platform, unification, first-party experiences, e-commerce front ends, fulfillment infrastructure, there's a certain, let's say, initial investment, not just from the money lens, but also from a capability lens, because these brands never had a digital first kind of play in that sense, right? for companies who've been committed to digital as a play, of course, they've built large businesses and not just on direct to consumer, but also a whole bunch of these marketplace engagements. Like before Baskin Robbins went with Swiggy, there's probably not enough of a business case to build an entire consumer front end.
Correct.
Right? So from that lens, how do you see the ROI business case? Or would you define some sort of incremental steps that, okay, do this, do this, do this, and then this is going to make so much sense from this lens, and then that's how you should play it?
I don't think it's as simple as step
I
1,
would
step 2,
imagine.
step 3. I mean, I wish
Which is
it
why it's a
were.
question, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's no playbook, but I think with every industry, every brand, like I've seen it play out differently at different stages as well. And I think it will all start with, do I understand my consumer? Do I know where they're dropping out? Do I then know how much nudges, how much do I do without being intrusive? How much do I do? Where is that sweet spot of where I can still get somebody back without them just blocking me and saying, I don't want to interact with this brand anymore? How do you ensure that you're seen everywhere, but not to the point where you become annoying, that you're popping up and they're wondering if you're listening into their conversations and things like that. Like all of that is happening with the privacy thing going for a toss today.
Absolutely.
So I think every brand needs to spend a lot of, like you said, maybe not money, but maybe the right skill set, which means hiring the right people to getting the right technology in place and not leaving it to IT to say, figure it out. No. Marketing needs to understand, and I think that's where the role of the marketer today has also become so much more evolved.
Tech savvy.
You have to be tech savvy. There is no escaping that.
Correct.
And also what I think marketers need to understand without getting worried or scared is that it's a tool. Like long years ago, somebody told me, when somebody in the Rajkot warehouse was teaching me how to do pivot and macros on an Excel sheet. And he was like, "Aap daro mat. Ye kuch nahi karega. You can make this do whatever you want. This will help you."
It's a weapon in your hands.
Absolutely. So I think that's exactly how AI is, or anything else that is going to come up tomorrow is. And it's to your advantage if you learn it, you experiment, you learn, you unlearn, and you use it. More importantly, use it. I think also marketers need to understand that it's okay if you become the case study first. It can be a failed case study, it can be a successful case study, but I think if you get an opportunity to be the first, stop asking your agency partners, iska use case kya hai? Nahi hoga use case, it's okay. Why don't you be the first one to do it?
Somewhere or the other, Samyukta, you've been very bold about some of these statements. It comes from the track record. You've won a bunch of awards. You've taken the Baskin Robbins things like with Swiggy, which was like a giant initiative. So it was a punt that played out well. So in some sense, you made some of these bold and risky moves fairly naturally and instinctively, and which is why you think all marketers should be able to do it by default. But I don't know if everybody was able to do this so casually to say that this is like, there's no escaping this.
I don't think it's casual. See, it's like a child.
It's casual, but perhaps the ease at which you're saying all of this seems...
No, I'll tell you why. Because what happens when you are a child? You're curious, right? You're naturally curious. You're not curbing your curiosity to say, I will ask only so many questions. मैं 2 why पूछने के बाद चुप बैठूंगा. No, जब तक आपको answer नहीं मिलता, you will ask why, क्यों.
But you'll also have a CFO who will ask his whys, right? And that's where the ROI question mark becomes the tricky one.
Which is why marketers should, I think, really stop worrying so much, because you know your craft better than anybody else, right? And you've been, you hold that position, or you're sitting there as a brand manager, as a brand custodian for a reason.
Sure.
And I think that's where I'm going to go back to what you said. You pick your right agency partners.
Right.
I hate the word vendor. Nobody's a vendor,
Yeah.
right? You are working with people who know more than you. And I think that's where you need to be intelligent in picking partners who are complete subject matter experts. And you work well with them.
One of the things I've learned again from a CMO that I spoke to, they've obviously been around for 15 years, 20 years, and you've been around for a fairly bit of time as well. What tends to happen with this whole technology/data things coming in, there's a bunch of service providers. Each of them will have their own sales pitch and story as to why they'll change the world for you. And as a marketer who's not been, let's say, deeply familiar with some of these things, it can get very easily overwhelming and confusing as to how to make that choice.
Correct.
So when you say that, choose the right partners, and there are 5 people pitching me the same story, how do you evaluate partners?
I think it's fairly complicated. I wouldn't deny that. It's not easy. And that's where you do your research as well, really well. Like,
would you call peer conversations as your EFF research? What is
peer
the research?
Conversation. When you attend forums, you ask other people, who are they talking to? You have a lot of communities today where you can kind of reach out to people, and there are active recommendations, by the way, happening in terms
Of
of
course.
which partner you should be going with.
Hmm.
And there's no escaping studying. I think one thing I learned from my stint at Abbott and my stint now at Kaya, looking at the medical fraternity, I think that's a very fascinating,
World, sure.
world. Doctors are constantly studying because the technology there is constantly evolving. Yesterday what used to be like, a full-fledged surgery today is being done by robotics.
Right.
A doctor has to stay on top of her or his game by constantly unlearning what they learnt in medical school and then getting familiar with new technology. And imagine you're not doing A/B testing. You're experimenting on somebody's life,
of course.
right? And they're constantly doing that. They want to study. A doctor at any age is always studying. And I think for me, that's been a huge inspiration in terms of, how I operate as a person. Because the more you study, the more you are familiar with things, the more, then your ability to, like you said, discern what's, where someone is just selling something to me versus where someone actually wants to partner with me and help my brand grow. I think then you can take those decisions. But if you walk into a meeting without doing your homework first, without preparing first, and then you expect the person across the table to just explain things to you, then it's not going to work.
You might just be in for a ride at some points.
Absolutely.
So somewhere or the other, the resistance might falter, but that's a risk you have to be prepared to take because that's a learning curve.
And it might still not work. You might do
that's
all the
okay.
effort and it might still colossally fail, which is okay. I mean, your risk appetite needs to be as high as well.
In some sense, as a marketer, you're very prepared to learn sometimes by taking risks because that's the only way to grow.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you'll end up stagnating and perhaps the risk becoming irrelevant given the times they're in.
Yeah.
Because you use the word inevitable is where I'm saying that if you're not crossing over to the side of accepting that technology is going to be a part of my life, then you risk being irrelevant.
Obsolete. Yeah.
Interesting. So, what's amazing, Samyukta, is you've been a marketer who's one Cannes Lions before. So, you've been the storyteller, the creative person, all of those. Let's just go back to that side of your life for a moment and understand what was the creative journey around those awards, what was the insights, and what was the journey?
Perfect. So, I think, like I said, big believer in consumer insights, understanding them really well. And I think the 3 times that I kind of got to go to Cannes as well was largely based on very simplistic consumer insights. So, for example, the idea that actually got me to Cannes in the first place was for Vaseline, and the whole concept being, and it was called "I'm More Than My Face." So basically, the currency for beauty in India has always been face. The beauty industry has always focused on everything to do with the face, and all your brands, all your products, everything is kind of built around it.
Sure.
We wanted to get into body in a big way, which nobody in India had done at that point in time. And this campaign actually then focused on working with very strong women across different fields, whether it was Shakti Mohan, who had just won Dance India Dance, or whether it was Mayanti Langar, who had just come into the scene, with the whole cricket place. And we actually did and then we had Dr. Aparna Santanam, who's incidentally the medical head of Kaya right now. And she was the leading dermatologist, and we actually did a global idea activation workshop on I'm More Than My Face. And everybody's narratives on, when I'm making a presentation to a team full of people, or when I'm holding a mic and speaking to an entire audience of cricket fans, or when I'm performing on stage where I'm using my body in order to showcase my strength and abilities as a woman. And that was the whole idea of I'm More Than My Face. So that was the first step.
Stuff brand managers dream of, right? This is the exact kind of work you would have loved to have in your resume, and you have it.
Yeah, thank you. So that's actually what paved the way for a lot of launches that we then ended up doing in the space, because it became a business currency for the brand itself after that, in terms of all the categories that you can imagine within body kind of happened, whether it was moisturization, hydration, skin lightening, everything kind of, drew parallels from here.
Awesome.
And again, based on a cultural insight. Second one, which actually then took us there, was this very simple idea. And this actually came from, my house help. And because she would say, which brand of detergent to buy, which brand of, whatever, your vessel washing, soap to buy. Everything is something that, and you realize that in the household care category segment, And I was at Levers even at that point in time. The whole concept of household care in India always spoke to the woman of the house, thinking that she's the one taking the decision.
Sure.
But the reality is that the decision is always taken by the house help.
Okay.
Because the soap that she's comfortable with, the soap that she feels is, going to clean best, the soap that she feels is safe on her hands, is the one that kind of ends up being bought into the house.
Sure.
So that moment of truth, we were talking about funnel conversion and all of that. It changes, that flip happens at that level. It doesn't happen right at the top,
Interesting.
So then the whole idea was that how do we now get to that person at various touch points? Where does she shop? Where does she interact? What is she watching? What is the content that she is viewing? And let us now start talking to a cohort that you wouldn't imagine otherwise, kind of using as an influence.
Would your ads show the house help?
No, it wouldn't. It would just talk to her, telling her why this brand is fantastic. So the whole idea was that we talk so much about, who the cohort should be. Sometimes, you're completely missing the boat on who you should be talking to. The third time, and this is the one where we actually ended up winning India her very first Young Can Lions Awards in 61 years. So India had been participating in the Young Lions Awards for 61 years. And it has 7 different categories under it. So nobody had ever won it. From India, India had never won a medal there.
Okay.
And this is the one where we were literally representing Team India. So there was no name. So it was me and a colleague of mine who kind of went there. And we were representing the country. So it was just a flag. So we almost felt like, sports people representing the country. We were put in a room just like we're sitting in right now for 24 hours with sheets of A4 size papers. And WFP had come up with this whole thing of saying that, I feel so old. By 2020, we want to eradicate, hunger. So the whole idea was that, 1 in every 3 person goes hungry in this world. And how do we kind of eradicate world food hunger? That was the whole idea was that. We leveraged on Unilever's Kisan, to kind of come up with a campaign called the Yellow Lunch Box.
Okay.
So the idea was very simple. Basically, when mums pack, the dabba for the child, they always give a little extra, thinking my child will get hungry. Let there be that half roti extra, 1 roti extra kind of. That's really how the pack happens. So the whole idea was that extra, if you can pack it in a separate box, and we'll distribute these yellow lunch boxes across these different schools, and we'll have these stands placed in schools, where then we leverage there was no Swiggy, Zomato back then. So the whole idea was we will pilot it in Mumbai, and we actually explained to the Can audience there, Six Sigma, the dabbawalas of Mumbai, and how we would kind of leverage on that network to come pick up the dabba, geo-tag it to the closest municipality school that was next to the school where the child could actually contribute. So you're actually feeding a child every single day. Just with that extra food that you're giving your child, instead you're just feeding another kid, and somebody's not going hungry because of that. So that is the idea that actually won India the medal for the first time that year.
So all 3 of them seems fairly interesting and fairly, let's say, creative and inspiring at the same time. So congratulations once again on that achievement. Been a very interesting conversation. I think we spanned a bunch of industries, but I think I learned a lot. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Absolutely enjoyed it.